Stein Hain. Thank you so much for joining me for learning Halakha concepts from the Daf from a philosophical perspective. It's great to join Hadran's efforts to continue to spread Torah study throughout the Jewish people. It is incredibly inspiring to see how much learning is happening all over the world, and it's great to be part of it. I want to dedicate our learning to the Kochot HaBitachon of Medinat Yisrael, to their success, to their safety, Bezrat Hashem, and to the return of the Chatufot and the Chatufim as whole as possible, Bezrat Hashem. Wishing everybody who is listening a lot of chizuk during these difficult days. Our topic today, you can find on the bottom of Nun Hey Amud Bet in Bava Kama. It is the topic of being pater midinei adam v'chayav bidinei shamayim. So I might do something that results in loss for someone else, monetary, financial loss for someone else, and not be prosecutable in a human court, but still be required to compensate that person based on the laws of the heavenly court. And this is a really, I would say, fertile concept to think about, because it raises the question of what does it mean for a legal system not to be willing or not to be able to prosecute actions that God deems problematic. In other words, what is the overlap, the Venn diagram, between a legal system, and especially a religious legal system, and morality, religious morality? Are there places where the legal system cannot go? And if so, what does that say about the constraints of the legal system? And what does that say about morality? Does it imply in some way that some of those things that the legal system can't enforce, almost that they are volitional, like you can choose whether you want to go that moral mile or not? So I think this concept really sets us up for that. And what I want to do is I want to take a little bit of a closer look at this concept and how Mefarshim talk about it. And then I want to think about where it fits in general to Chazal's thinking about law and morality, and particularly the morality that focuses on human beings feeling mutually responsible for each other in a society. How do Chazal envision being able to create a society, shape a society where people are mutually responsible? Is enforcement always the mechanism? If not enforcement, is there another mechanism? And I think that the idea of being chayav b'dinei shamayim is an interesting intervention in that question. And we'll get to it. But let's just look at some of the examples, right? We have the Breita on the bottom of Nun Hey Amud Bet, where Rabbi Yoshua tells us, we have Tanya Amar Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yoshua says, Arba advarim hauseotan pater midinei adam chayav b'dinei shamayim. There are 4 things that a person might do whereby they would be exempt from human law and still be required to pay by divine law. And here they are, ve'eluhin. Haporetz geder b'fnei behemat chavero, someone who breaches a fence in front of someone else's animal, and presumably that fence, the breach in the fence is what allows the animal to run away, and now this person has lost their animal and also has a broken fence. That's the first example. Second example, hakofef kamato shel chavero b'fnei hadleka, someone who bends their friends, their fellows, standing grain in front of a fire, meaning creates a situation whereby the grain ends up being burned. That's the second example, thus also causing loss to the owner. Third, v'hasocher edei sheker l'ha'id, someone who hires false witnesses to testify, seems to be in a situation also where the testimony of those witnesses ends up costing someone else money that would have been rightfully theirs. And lastly, v'hayodeh edud l'chavero ve'eno me'idlo, someone who knows testimony that could help a fellow, but decides not to testify, right? Presumably, again, a case where that testimony would have entitled that person to some money or not to have to pay certain money. And because the testimony never came forward, this person wrongfully either lost money or didn't get their money back, which, those are equivalent, parallel things. So I want to say a few things about these cases, just as an overall for us to think about before we go into how the Mefarshim deal with this concept of pater midinei adam and chai b'dinei shamayim. First thing you're going to get when you continue learning, Bezrat Hashem, you will get to Bava Kama Daf Kuf Amud Aleph. And in Bava Kama Daf Kuf Amud Aleph, you will find out about something that is known as garmi. Okay? Many people may be aware of this distinction, and many people on this conversation may be unaware of this distinction. But when we talk about financial loss that is caused by someone to someone else in a manner that is perhaps less than direct, we talk about two different types of actions. Actions that are grama, that we consider actions whereby you are pater midinei adam and chayav b'dinei shamayim, and then actions that are garmi, which may also be somewhat indirect, but there are reasons to consider that you should be chayav b'dinei adam. There much ink has been spilled on how do you determine the difference between grama and garmi, but suffice it to say, our Gamarra, by giving us 4 examples of situations where clearly the Gamarra thinks the relationship between what I did and what happened was not sufficiently, we might say, causative rather than just being a correlation to warrant that status of garmi, that we would consider some of these examples to be examples that are grama. But it's not super simple. And when you get to Tav Kuf, I'm sure that there will be a shir, maybe I'll get to give it if I'm lucky, that describes the difference between grama and garmi. But that's the first thing, just to know that it's in there. Second thing, I want to point out that this language in the Braita with Rabbi Yoshua, where he says that you are pater midinei adam and chayav b'dinei shamayim. So my question is, so you are exempt in human law and you are required by divine law. Now, does that mean you are exempt in human law from paying, but you still did something wrong? Or does that mean you are exempt because you've done nothing wrong, right? And when it comes to being chai b'dinei shamayim, we're talking about maybe like an extra level, right? Almost like I don't even ben adam l'chavero, I don't owe this other person anything, but ben adam l'makom, I want to go to the highest level, and even though it's really not my fault and I really shouldn't have to, ben adam l'makom, I'm not looking to, get out of being responsible, right? Is it that? Or is pater midinei adam meaning pater milishalem b'dinei adam, meaning I'm exempt from paying from human law, but I'm not exempt from, but I still did something wrong. I really did something wrong, and maybe I'm exempt from paying because if the court started making everybody who did some indirect nezek or caused someone money indirectly, we would have lots and lots of problems, bigger problems, and injustices, actually, and forcing people to pay when they shouldn't pay. But really, I did something wrong here. And midinei shamayim, even though maybe it would be bad policy for the court to charge me, midinei shamayim, I should pay, right? I should pay of my own accord because I really did do something wrong. So the language kind of leaves it open. Language leaves it open. The third thing I want to say is that it's interesting to see, this Breita is actually a reworking of a Tosefta in Shavuot in the third parak. And in that Tosefta in Shavuot, two of the major differences in that Tosefta in Shavuot, one is a difference that's just fun in terms of context. In Bava Kama, you notice the four examples that are given. One is about the loss of an animal. One is about somebody's possessions getting burned. One is about hiring false witnesses. The last one is about refusing to testify, meaning the first two are about people's possessions. The second two are about testimony, right? So, of course, in the Tosefta and Shavuot, which is in more the world of testimony, it's reversed, right? The first two examples are examples about testimony that you decided not to testify or you hired false witnesses. And then the next two examples are examples about possessions where, you bind somebody's, or bend, somebody's standing grain in front of a fire, or you breach the fence and somebody's animal gets away. But that's just a contextual difference between the two. But it's also interesting, the language that Rabbi Yehoshua uses in the Tosefta in Shavuot it's just I don't know, it seems to me to be stronger language actually. And it seems to me that it's yeah, I'm not sure. Well, I'll read it to you. You'll tell me what you think. Right at the beginning of the third parak in the Tosefta in Shavuot, Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Dalid ein chayavin l'shalim min hadin. There are four who are not required based on the law to pay, right? Does that mean they did something wrong, but they're not required to pay? Does it mean that they didn't do something wrong? I'm not totally sure. But this coming language is really strong. But God doesn't forgive them until they pay, right? It's like, that does not sound like you're doing something good by paying. It sounds like if you don't pay, you're doing something bad, right? I think that the Tosefta and Shavuot makes it sound more like you really did something bad here. That's what I think. But people could quibble here and there. But so that's another thing that I wanted to point out about these four. And then the last thing I want to point out about these four is really what the Gamarra does with these four, right? What does the Gamarra do? The Gamarra it essentially says, we don't understand really what it means to be in this limbo state, like in the middle of the seesaw, where you're like not chai b'dinei adam, but you are chai b'dinei shamayim, right? So it starts asking questions about each one of the four cases. It says, what maybe you should be chai b'dinei adam, right? Like, what do you mean if you knock down, you breach a fence that's in front of somebody's animal, you just broke their wall and let their animal escape. Why aren't you chai b'dinei adam? You should be, right? So the Gemara says, oh, we're talking about when it was a kotel ra'ua, it was or a geder ra'ua, it was a shoddy, it was kind of a shoddy fence anyway, right? So those are the kinds of questions that are basically asked about each of the four. Like, sounds like you should be chai b'dinei adam. And then the Gemara says, no, well, actually, it's this kind of case where it's a little bit less, it's more of a correlation and it's not necessarily causation in the same kind of way to something that necessarily wouldn't happen. But then the Gemara goes to the flip side and says, well, actually, like maybe we should have Habamina that these four, now that we've sort of defanged them so much, that maybe they shouldn't be Chayav B'dinei Shamayim, right? Like maybe they shouldn't have been Chayav B'dinei Shamayim because you really didn't do much, right? So they try to kind of fix it there. And I just think it's, it kind of tells you how uncomfortable the concept is to try to figure out why would it not rise to the level of this, but still rise to the level of that. But I want to think about this question that we're asking, which is basically, if I am p'tura midinei adam and chayevet b'dinei shamayim, did I do something wrong ben adam l'chaveira? And if I did, why isn't the court doing anything about it? And if I didn't do something wrong, ben adam l'chavero, what does it mean to now have like an obligation, ben adam l'makom, to pay someone, right? So I want to look for a minute at two different takes on this question. And I think that the two different takes on this question of like, did you do something wrong? And even ben adam l'chavero, did you do something wrong? Or ben adam l'chavero, maybe you didn't do something so bad, but ben adam l'makom you still did. Or ben adam l'makom you should still maybe, push further. I think you find these represented in different ways by different version. So I want to look for a minute at the Meiri. So the Meiri writes, Katvu Gedolei Hadorot, the greatest of the generations, and by this he's referring to the Ramban, have written, Shekol Shne'amar Alav Chayav B'Dinei Shamayim, anyone about whom it is said that they are obligated to pay in the laws of heaven, Pasol Hu Le'edut, that person becomes invalid as a witness, Achi Yashiv, until they compensate the party that lost financially. What? He says, Vahad Varim Nirim, makes sense to me. Sheme'achar shu chayav la'ashiv, if you are really obligated in the heavenly court to return the money or to compensate the loss, Torek Zela Halalav, Achi Yashiv, this person has committed theft until they compensate the other person. Now, what the Meiri is trying to do here is he's trying to give some teeth to this Chayav Dinei Shamayim. Being Chayav Dinei Shamayim doesn't mean that there's no way we can do anything to you to enforce you compensating the person who's lost something as a result of your actions, even indirectly. Actually, there are some actions we can take. It's true, we can't force you to pay back, but we can say we consider you a gazlan, we consider you a thief until you pay back. Now, this is really the Meiri and the Ramban kind of undermining the whole concept of having something that's pater midinei adam b'chai b'dinei shamayim. But I understand why. Because if you did something wrong, the legal system shouldn't just ignore it. If you did something wrong, klape somebody else, the legal system shouldn't just ignore it, right? So yes, maybe it's true. When we have things that are grama, nizikin that are grama, we don't want the court to over-prosecute those things because that itself could become an injustice. So we say you're chai b'dinei shamayim to return it. But when we say you're chai b'dinei shamayim, it doesn't mean you didn't do anything wrong and just klape shmaya do something extra. It means you're a gazlan until you do the right thing. And in fact, our legal system is going to recognize you as such. And that, I think, is really saying that these examples of chai b'dinei shamayim are examples where you really did something wrong and the court's hands are tied, but we may find other ways to prosecute what you've done because you can't have a society where people can do things like this and just get off scot-free. But that is not the tack that the Marshal takes. The Marshal has a very different tack, which indicates that maybe you didn't do something so bad, right? The Marshal suggests the following. First, he quotes somebody who is trying to give teeth, right? Umatzati katuv b'tshuva, I found written in a responsum. No, this is what it says. Nearly, it seems to me, where it says that a person is obligated to pay by the laws of heaven, even though Beitin can't force the person to pay. Even so, the court should push the person verbally. They can't go freeze their assets. They can't do anything like that. They're not going to have an official verdict. But without kfiyah, without forcing, verbally, they should try to push this person to do it, right? So that's very much sort of in the Meiri's kind of camp of let's try to actually prosecute, because how could it be that somebody does something wrong and we just let it stand? That's just not good enough. But the Marashal disagrees. He says, no, the loni hirali, I don't think so. Doesn't seem right to me. Gam lishna to Dinei Shamayim, even the language of saying that someone's chayav b'dinei shamayim, lo mashma liyot chiyuv afil b'mektzat b'dinei adam. Doesn't sound like you're at all obligated to anything in human courts. So human courts shouldn't meddle. And when I read this, I almost think to myself, well, maybe according to the Marshal's view, it's almost like you didn't really do anything wrong. Ben Adam l'chavero here. It was so distant. It was so going to happen anyway. It was so grama. They didn't really do anything wrong here. But but klapi shmaya, if you want to, when it comes to God, we're not looking to evade blame or responsibility. And maybe the idea of being chai b'dinei shamayim is to push us to take more responsibility, even though we didn't commit the wrong. But you know what? Somebody else lost out, and I should care about that, right? It seems to be a fundamentally different position than the Meiri, both in terms of whether they think you really did something wrong to the other person, and as a result, whether they think you're even, a bad guy or a bad gal if you don't compensate, right? Or whether it's just really good if you do, right? The Meiri is willing to hold you in contempt of court if you don't compensate, while, the Marshal says the court can't even try to, they can't even try to push you verbally. They can't even try to exert pressure on you. But I understand why the Meiri says what he says, but I think it's interesting to consider the approach of the Marshal. What does it mean to have something that someone did results in a loss to someone else? Maybe that doesn't mean necessarily that what the person did was wrong, but we still want them to care about that other person. We still want them to care. We don't want them to be looking to evade responsibility. We want them to be looking to make someone else whole. And it seems to me that in general, when we think about how Chazal tried to inculcate a sense of mutual responsibility between people, that there's two basic routes that they go. And I'll just give some examples. The two basic routes that they seem to go are the routes of enforcement, like we're going to legally make you responsible to do X for someone else. And the other route is almost like education, I guess, character formation. And I'll give examples of what I mean. When we talk about trying to, enforce a sense of mutual responsibility for each other. So one of the things that I think about is the example, the concept of kofin al midat Sodom, that we require you not to act like a citizen of Sodom. And the examples that are offered of what it means to act like a citizen of Sodom, you'll get there when you get to Baba Batra. I think Yud Bet and Yud Gimel. But the examples are basically where you need something, doesn't cost me anything, and I still won't let you use my stuff, even though it's not going to cost me anything. Because what's mine is mine. What's yours is yours. Stark boundary between us. And Chazal essentially say, no, no, no. That's Sodom. That's not what we want. We want a sense of mutual responsibility. So if there's something where you stand to benefit and I don't stand to gain, excuse me, you stand to gain and I don't stand to lose anything by letting you use my property, you should be able to use my property. And in fact, we're going to legally enforce that, right? And that legal enforcement is powerful. Legal enforcement is a powerful tool. Now, is it going to make me a more generous person because the court forced me to let someone use my property? Maybe, maybe not. But the results are going to be that this other person will be taken care of. That's very different from a mechanism that's like, we can't force you, but we're going to tell you this is a good thing to do, right? A good example, I think, would be Lifnei Mishurat Hadin. It's more like educational character building. It's actually, it's volition. It's what's the word I'm looking for? Discretion, right? Dr. Deborah Barra, she writes this in her dissertation on it. It's a great dissertation on the topic. Hopefully, it will be a great book on the topic. That Lifnei Mishurat Hadin can't enforce everything, but we want to teach you to have the kind of discretion that you would want to do a little extra for someone. You would want to help them even when you don't need to help them. Even when legally you're exempt, you're fine, right? And that, broadly speaking, is like a character development idea. Very different from enforcement. In fact, enforcing it is not going to do anything because the point here is we want you to make the decision to do it, right? And when you think broadly about enforcement of mutual responsibility and education towards discretion to have mutual responsibility, of course, each of these are going to have their advantages, right? You're teaching people to have discretion towards taking care of someone else. You're really teaching them to build their character, right? That's what you're really teaching them to do, become good people. But of course, it has the limitation of, let's say they decide not to do it. That's their discretion. They decide not to do it, right? Or better yet, they decide discretionarily to be extra nice and the other person exploits them for it, right? There's a lot that could go wrong in that situation. Maybe a society decides they never want to be extra nice to each other because they don't want to be a friar. They don't want to be the one. Well, that's problematic too, right? It's not for naught that the Gamarra suggests that the reason why Yerushalayim was destroyed, the second Beit HaMikdash, is because they did everything just by the book and nothing Lifnei Mishurat Hadin, right? But so you see, it has advantages and disadvantages. And enforcement also advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is it's all transparent. It's all right there. Everybody knows what the law is going to be. You're going to get the results that you're looking for, but are you necessarily going to change anybody's character that way? And more than that, like, you're going to have to find a standard that is kind of a very basic minimal standard, right? It's usually going to be the moral floor and not the moral ceiling when you come up with enforcement, right? Like, take the example of I don't stand to lose, but you stand to benefit. What if I say to you, well, actually, I do stand to lose because of XYZ, right? Maybe something that looks like I'm not losing anything. At first, we can actually see that I am losing something, right? So it ends up being, it's not always so easy to find the parameters of where is it fair to enforce something. And I think in our machloket between the Meiri and the Maharshal, even though they're not talking to each other, but in our machloket over, well, Dinei Shamayim, is that something where you can enforce it by saying you're not going to be allowed to be an aid until you pay that back, right? So it's turning Dinei Shamayim into something that we can enforce. Or is Dinei Shamayim dafka something like the Maharshal says, we can't enforce it. It's you can't even the court can't even tell you not to do it. Meaning the court can't even tell you, try to pressure you to pay back, right? And the significance there would be we're trying to teach you to have yirat shamayim, right? Meaning where it might be the results are not always great for the other person, but we are trying to teach you to think about what God would want from you. And I think in general, hopefully what we've done here is we basically taken the notion of pater midinei adam and chai b'dinei shamayim, and we've looked at it from this sort of broader philosophical perspective of what is the way to encourage people to take care of each other? What is the way to encourage people to create a society where people are behaving well and not behaving badly? And the truth is, obviously, you need both enforcement, meaning law, and you need education to good character and moral behavior. But it's interesting to see the machloket that seems to surround chai b'dinei shamayim, pater midinei adam, chai b'dinei shamayim, in this regard. Thank you so much for joining, and I look forward to our next session.